And this specific webinar was really designed to be kind of a replacement for the poster sessions that we have had at many of our General Assembly meetings, where members come really with a poster and people go around and receive a little input on something that is new in the agency, some good practice, some specific initiative that an agency has done recently. So it's an opportunity to hear about new developments and lessons learned and share a bit of good practice as well. So without further ado, let's get into the real business then. And I would like to start the first mini session of this morning's webinar, which is on the thematic analysis. And I would like to introduce Leah Lauri from the Estonian Quality Assurance Agency, ENQA, who will start with her presentation on evaluation of research and development in professional higher education institutions, implications for practice. So Leah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Maria. Good morning, everyone. So I would like to share with you our experiences on conducting thematic analysis on the research and development in the professional higher education institutions. And I will start talking a little bit about the context or the background. Here in this slide, you see the standards for institutional accreditation in Estonia. And as you can see, research and development is one among the standards. We know that in quite many European countries, the research and development is not assessed during the quality assurance framework, external quality assurance framework. But here it has been for some decades already on the assessment. So there might be several reasons, but perhaps one of these is that as the universities are regularly going through the research evaluation, the professional higher education institutions do not have such kind of obligation, but at the same time they are expected to conduct applied research and contribute to the innovations in their field. And also very many of those have master level programs, which means that the link between research and teaching and learning are very much expected to happen. So that's why we conducted this particular analysis. You see the results of the accreditation, institutional accreditation results of professional higher education institutions of last 3 years. So we are in the mid-term of this cycle of institutional accreditation, and you can see the results thus far for professional higher education institutions. And you see that in the left-hand side column, you see the standards and research and development being 11th. And in the upper row, you see the professional higher education institutions abbreviations. So, and the green box, as you can assume, indicates full compliance to the standard, while the orange shows the partial compliance. And you can see that the 4 of these indicating research development are marked as partially compliant. Of course, we knew that the research development is area for improvement based on the previous cycle of institutional accreditation. But what we started to notice that the problems still persist. And so we conducted this thematic analysis, small scale analysis, to find out what are the main reasons, in addition to the lack of funding, perhaps, for this partial compliance. And what we found out was that there seems to be a lack of strategic view to the research and development in the professional higher education institutions. The activities of research and development that are taking place in these institutions, they might need to be more related to the strategic focus of the institutions, and also that the key performance indicators should be in place and the impact should be there described. What are the impact that are expected to happen? Very often we saw that the research topics, for example, are coming from the individual interests of academic staff, individual academic staff, and not that much on the mission or focus of the institution itself. So secondly, what we witnessed was the teaching staff academic qualifications and research activity, or perhaps research competencies, were not sufficient to conduct research. And there were not time resources available to, for example, for doctoral studies for the academic staff. And thirdly, what we saw is the lack of support for applying for international research and development projects, and also the management of these projects were somewhat vague. And of course, fourth thing I started with is the lack of resources. We knew that the research grants are very competitive, the state funding even, and they are very often out of the reach for the professional higher education institutions. But of course, we also saw that there are very many good practices existing. For these two institutions, for example, that got full compliance, we saw that the stakeholders' involvement for the development plan were very much involved in these. And also that, for example, the research competencies were written down very explicitly in the job descriptions of teaching staff, for example. And of course, what is generally strength in these institutions in Estonia is the very close cooperation with employers. And also the academic staff members are very active in the in taking part of the professional networking. And it has contributed quite a lot to the study program development in these institutions, and also provision of continuing education courses, but not that much for the research and the development yet, we hope. So what we experienced through this process was that the analysis is a very good way to acquire new knowledge on certain topics, but it might not be enough to make the change happen. And the key word here is the communication and perhaps the proactive approach. And we took our analysis and contacted the stakeholder groups, and we had the roundtable based on the report, where the Rectors' Conference of Professional Higher Education Institutions were in place, and also ministry representatives of the Ministry of Education and Research. And it happened that the timing of this kind of event was very, very good. That there is a planning of financing of the new EU structural fund period taking place in the ministry. So there were quite many ideas that we could already relate to based on our analysis. For example, the financing possibilities of doctoral studies of academic staff of professional higher education institutions are going to be financed by this measure, and they can also apply for knowledge transfer grants, which is really great because, as we know, the human resources are very much decisive in this kind of developments. And also, for example, the application for research databases for the libraries is under discussions. And there are some other examples that we could pretty much relate to. So just to conclude with this small experience, that the analysis is a good thing to acquire new knowledge, but to to make the change happen. We think it's very important to have a proactive approach to bring the stakeholders together and start the discussion based on this analysis. So I believe this was all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. I think that was a very interesting presentation. I was happy to hear that this kind of thematic analysis, which somehow often is felt like agencies just have to do it because it's one of the ESG, it can be actually made into a useful tool to identify issues, kind of maybe systemic issues or sectoral issues where something could be done then to improve. So it is not only analysis for the sake of analysis, but analysis for impact. And I think that is a very good point. We have perhaps often, at least in where I have worked in our world, it's so much work to do an analysis. So once you finish it, you're happy it's done. And you can shelve it in your folder, and you're happy it's over. And that's really actually when the work starts on putting that into practice. So thanks a lot for that vision. And we'll have time to discuss also with you and take questions from the audience. So please keep those questions or comments coming in the chat. Also, if you have similar experiences or have struggled with similar issues, please post in the chat and we can pick that up after the next brief presentation, which is by Anthony Dean and Sarah Bennett from EQ Arts. And they talk about how thematic analysis can be a means of identifying needs of the arts sector. So please go ahead, Anthony and Sarah.
Okay, well, we're very much going to pick up on the theme that you've just introduced, Maria, about the thematic analysis. I'm just going to start sharing the screen here. Okay, so firstly, I'd like to thank the organisers of the webinar for the opportunity for us to give this presentation on behalf of EQ Arts. My name is Anthony Dean and I'm Emeritus Professor at the University of Winchester in the UK. Both my professional and academic background is in the performing arts, and I've been involved in EQA processes in higher education since the early 1990s. Initially within the UK for our national agency, the QAA, but then across the EHEA, working on behalf of a number of national quality assurance agencies, as well as for EQ Arts, for which I'm also a founding board member. Along with my colleague, Dr. Sarah Bennett, I was jointly responsible for the authorship of EQ Arts' first thematic analysis, which we're going to discuss certain aspects of in this presentation. But I'd like my colleague, Sarah, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Tony. So yes, I'm Sarah Bennett. I'm a visiting fellow at Kingston University in London, where I was head of School of Art and Architecture until 2020. I too have been involved in external quality assurance processes in various roles in the UK, the United States, and also more recently in the European higher education area through EQ Arts and working with other QA agencies. I became a board member of EQ Arts 3 years ago and just commenced my second 3-year term. I'm a practicing artist and I'm delighted to be able to attend this webinar and co-present with Tony. So over to you, Anthony.
Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So EQ Arts is a sector-specific quality assurance agency working exclusively within the creative, performing arts and design, or the CPAD sector, as we refer to it, of higher education. The founding board members of EQ Arts have been collectively active in international quality assurance since 1996 within the organisational framework of the European League of Institutes of the Arts, or ELIA as it's known. EQ Arts became a fully independent foundation registered in the Netherlands in 2015 and joined the ENQA register earlier this year. In 2020, we completed our first thematic analysis, which was first published on the EQ Arts website in September of that year. So what we did was we looked at 12 reports 14 reports that we had completed in the period from 2017 to 2020. So there were 14 different arts higher education institutions that were the subject of those reports. Those institutions were spread across 6 different EHEA countries, and 5 of those 14 reviews were done in collaboration with other agencies. So with AQ Austria, with our sister organisation Musique, and with the accreditation organisation known as the Flanders, better known as NVAO. I'll now pass over to Sarah.
Yes,
We'll
thank
say
you.
a little bit more about the methodology we used in conducting the thematic analysis.
Yes, I'm going to be very brief in this because I'm sure you're all aware of the process. But we took it was our first time doing a thematic analysis. So we took a very systematic and evidence-based approach to the thematic analysis process that also reflected the experiences and expertise represented by the EQ Arts Board, who had worked extensively in external quality assurance context. And the process we used moved from a quantitative to a qualitative process of plotting against the standards, as you're probably all aware how one would do it. But this careful approach to the quantitative and qualitative interrogation of the review outcomes enabled the development of the EQ Arts thematic analysis, shared with the creative and performing arts and design sector, and produced a critical overview that highlights good practice and identifies areas for improvement within the sector, summarised against each of the standards. Back to Tony to describe our next steps.
Okay, so EQ Arts used the thematic analysis as a means of identifying specific areas of activity within the CPAD sector that it could offer support to. These are summarised within section 3 of the report, which is available on the agency's website. However, for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on 3 specific areas where EQ Arts has already identified follow-up actions of different kinds. The first one is in the area of quality culture. The thematic analysis suggested that there is a need to offer support to the sector to assist institutions in developing and maintaining an effective quality culture through assisting them in their development of a stronger constructive alignment of their IQA policies and processes with broader institutional strategic planning processes and their development of other key internal policies. Over to Sarah.
So on to blended learning. Through our method of analysis, it became evident that while different modes of delivery and variety of learning and teaching methods are a real strength in the CPAD sector, e-learning has been introduced with varying degrees of commitment and efficacy within the student learning experience. So the active use of VLEs or online learning was more advanced in some institutions than others, and in some disciplines within institutions than others in the same institution. We saw that there was a significant scope to utilise available e-learning resources and tools much more imaginatively and effectively across the curricula. However, as we were completing our thematic analysis, the COVID-19 global pandemic was starting to impact on teaching and learning across the higher education sector, which we needed to take into account when planning to do further analysis of best practice and related resources developed across the sector. Over to Tony.
So the third area that we're going to mention is internationalization. And although the thematic analysis revealed that opportunities provided to students and staff to engage in international exchanges, particularly through the Erasmus Plus program, was a well-established and highly active aspect of the CPAD sector, other aspects of the internationalization agenda were less well developed or embedded within the student learning experience. So, for example, the internationalization of curricula, and in some cases, the formal recognition of credits awarded by international partner institutions were areas that we felt could be improved in the sector. Moving on to our last slide. On this slide, we're going to briefly summarize the actions that the EQ Arts Board has determined will be implemented over the coming year. The first of these is an online workshop. The workshop will be led by Lucien Bollard, a member of the EQ Arts Board, who recently published via the European Association of Institutions in Higher Education, or EURASHI as it's known, the second edition of his book, Manual for Internal Quality Assurance in Higher Education. The workshop will focus on the ways that institutions can develop a more effective and constructive alignment of institutional IQA policy with strategic planning processes and the development of other key institutional policies as a means of promoting an effective quality culture.
So the second action that we determined in EQ Arts was a survey report. So we recognise that online learning is a challenge in our sector, which traditionally emphasises face-to-face teaching and delivery, and especially in its disciplines which are collective or collaborative, such as filmmaking or performance, or where embodied learning activities are key methods. Through our own professional affiliations, Anthony and myself, and our pedagogic experience, we became aware of the measures taken across the sector to urgently establish new approaches to learning and teaching and assessment during the global pandemic. This aspect of higher arts education needs urgent attention. So EQ Arts proposes to undertake a survey report using the following approach. We're going to take 10 to 12 institutions which are representative of the CPAD disciplines and also the European higher education area countries to develop as case studies. We've decided against sending out lots of questionnaires. So each case study looks at three things: what online delivery or blended learning was in place prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, what was in place during and developed and introduced during, and then what good practice is going to be maintained following the global pandemic. Of course, we're still in it, and a lot of hybrid activities going on. So the other thing that we're going, thank you, Maria. The other thing that we're doing, we're using semi-structured interviews, and we're going to interview three different people in each institution: a manager or leader with responsibility for teaching and learning, a member of staff, an academic teacher who's delivering, and a student who hopefully has been part of the journey from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. And we hope to have the interviews completed in the first part of 2022 and the survey report published late 2022. Over to Tony.
Okay, just the final area is about establishing a quality label, and we were inspired by the Certificate of Quality and Internationalization, or CEQINT, developed by the European Consortium for Accreditation. EQ Arts intends to develop a quality label for internationalization that is specifically tailored to the CPAD sector, that will enable institutions or individual programs to identify or self-identify to international collaborative partners that evidence good practice across a range of aspects of the internationalization agenda. We think this is an area that could be strengthened.
And then I'm just going to wrap up my final words, Maria. Sorry, we're slightly over. But I really want to reiterate what you mentioned earlier, because we found doing our first thematic analysis in EQ Arts, we found it so productive for identifying the themes and kinds of provision we can develop to offer to our sector. And the overall process was illuminating and constructive. And our next thematic analysis will be undertaken late 2023. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Anthony. That was, again, very, very interesting. Not only did your thematic analysis lead to a concrete action plan that you can support your institutions better, but also promoted other additional research and analysis of good practice. And I think that that's a very nice thing. I'm really impressed by the concreteness of the consequences of such an analysis indeed. And I'd like to ask Leah to join us on the screen, because now we have a little bit of time for some discussion. And there is a question that I have received, which I think it's also good. You have two very different agencies, I think, because of you know, where you work and how you work, and probably how you're also financed. And the question is about indeed financing of thematic analysis. How do you do that? Is it part of your regular budget? Is it financed by the state? Do you have to build the revenue through the other activities to kind of save your own reserves for that? Or is there some kind of additional funds that you can apply for nationally or internationally to do such thematic analysis? So whoever wants to go first, yes, Anthony, please go ahead.
Well, it cost us nothing. Partly because, well, myself and Sarah are both members of the board, so we undertook the work as part of our board responsibilities. The board works in a series of working groups, sets up a series of working groups, and indeed a working group was set up to develop the thematic analysis. So I think our costs were zero.
But may I add to that? So, well, some people did that. So that was volunteering work, and it was just out of the interest, goodwill.
Well, we don't see it as volunteering because we expect all the board members to undertake responsibilities on behalf of the organisation. So other board members are involved in other projects that we're doing. So I don't see it as voluntary. And in fact, I think the fact that we didn't outsource the thematic analysis to somebody else was particularly helpful, because it enabled us to work very closely with relaying to the board what was emerging from the thematic analysis, and it engendered a lot of discussion among the board about the themes that were emerging, and there are many more themes than we've mentioned today. So I suppose if we'd have been in a position to fund the thematic analysis and to actually invite, say, consultants or experts to undertake it on our behalf, I'm not sure it would have been quite as effective for us as it has been. But I mean, I appreciate that other agencies would have to do this in a different way.
Yes, Sarah, you wanted to add something?
No, I'm fine. I totally said it all.
No, I think that is a very interesting point. And so you basically think it's part of the task. If you are a board member, you know, that's what you are to do, because you have an interest for the community, for the sector, and for your organization, and want to know what's going on and what you can do better. And from the personal experience we have had at the ENQA is that if you do outsource thematic analysis, it's actually much more work, because it's not so easy for people to understand what things are of interest and relevance for that sector. You have to really be in it to easily understand and be able to pick the key issues, and also then feed them into the processes. Otherwise, they will be dead reports. Leah, sorry, Anthony.
Just to add, sorry, I don't want to outstay my welcome, but I think the board members, the board is made up of people who have been working in this area of EQA for a long time and worked for many agencies. I think many of the agencies that are represented here today, we've all worked for them. So we're picking up information all the time. We're not specifically reliant on the thematic analysis. That's just a focus, but our broader knowledge is also terribly helpful.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Leah, how is it at ECA? How do you finance, in terms of money and human resources, your thematic analysis?
I think it's a very good question and very essential one. That in our case, it's the part of our regular budget, and so we have to plan the analysis for the next year, and even have the longer plan if possible. And some people working at ECA, they have in their job descriptions this obligation to contribute to these analyses. So we see that this is also very good way that we have a small team of people who have these competencies in place. And actually, I wanted to ask from Anthony and Sarah, how is it in your case that you expect your employees to have these research competencies in place, or you develop these, or it is just some people who you hire for to have these kind of competencies?
Well, I think that we regularly undertake skills audits of our board, and we add to the board where we realize we have deficiencies. So people on the board already have their own expertise, and in fact all the expertises we need, you know, apart from accountancy. which we do outsource.
Yeah, some things are not so easily learned. And there is a comment in the chat from Henning, who actually posed this question initially, that it can be really a problem for agencies whose funding system works in a different way and who are really only funded for the actual external quality assurance activities. So that the situations can be very different for the agencies. I don't know if Michelle or Orla want to quickly say something about how it is in their context and what's the role and position of thematic analysis, just in a couple of words. Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
It's a tricky question. NVRO included a thematic analysis in its strategic plan, and it's included in our regular budget, but we make very modest attempts to produce thematic analysis. And it has also been a recommendation in the latest ENQA review report to step up and be making that effort. But there's still, it's work in process, let's put it that way.
Thank you, Michelle. Orla.
Yeah, so our recent analysis accreditation were conducted by 2 external experts.
Sorry, Orla, we don't hear you.
Reports.
We don't hear you very well.
Oh,
there might be a network problem. So I suggest maybe you try just without the video for this moment and see if it can be solved.
Sorry, is that any better?
It's a little better. Yeah.
Okay, apologies.
Now we hear you.
Sorry. Okay, so our recent analysis of accreditation reports was conducted by 2 external experts, and these covered QOI program validation reports, reports of universities and IoTs, and reports of professional bodies. I know we also conduct like synthesis reports, looking at the themes that are come into us through our annual report, the quality reports. I'm not too sure about budget and things like that, but I know we do use that to kind of highlight the common themes and our issues that are arising within the sector, and it's very useful that way. I think the difficult thing is how time consuming it can be, and if anybody has any tips about software that can be used to do this easily, we're very open to hearing it.
Okay, thanks, Rola. That's also an open invitation for the chat. But yes, Sarah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the thematic analysis in and of itself is a means to this is what we found, it's a means to an end to then move to something else, which also then takes up our time. So I think that one of the key things is to make sure that the thematic analysis, you're not doing them too frequently, because you need to then work with the findings and offer, as we've set out, various opportunities to the sector. And so I think that, for us, that space in between where you can reflect and move forward with some suggested ideas is really crucial. But yes, you have to get the thematic analysis done in the first place, though. And I understand that the budgetary constraints for people.
I think you really impressed or surprised people with this approach that you use explicitly the thematic analysis as a tool to find out the needs of the stakeholders and the sector, the institutions, rather than just a way to publish reports that describe and analyze the generic findings, which is the wording of the ESG standard 3.4, and that's kind of the requirement. All from the Swedish agency is asking whether you could elaborate a little bit on that. And I think you've partially just now answered to that, Sarah, but maybe if there is something else you'd like to add to that. So, but I say that the analysis has to make sense beyond just being a response to a requirement.
Yes, I mean, I think that obviously there are choices, and you have to, I mean, we would have looked at blended learning, or we would have looked at online learning, because we found that across the sector there was such a variation. But then, of course, the pandemic sort of brought it to our attention, and everyone has been dealing with the same questions. So then it became very urgent to do this. But so you have to think of the thematic analysis also in the context of what else is happening across the higher education sector, and in our case, in the art and design, creative art and performing arts design sector. So it makes sense to decide at the end. You can't do everything, so you have to prioritize. And I think the prioritizing and the way that the EQ Arts Board has used thematic analysis to prioritize certain activities is really crucial, because you cannot do everything. The findings are there anyway, they're published, so everyone can read them. But it's what I think you do with them. I hope I've represented that okay, Tony.
Yeah. No, thanks a lot. That's very helpful. And on the other hand, what came up from Leah's presentation is it's simply by looking at the table, I mean, kind of very raw data of saying, what are the areas where institutions seem to get the least good marks? Okay, why is that? What's wrong? Is the standard wrong? Is there a systemic problem? Is there lack of funding? Is there lack of enthusiasm? Whatever it might be. And that kind of prompted the direction, because of course also on thematic analysis, I mean, the sky is the limit. You could analyze anything to any extent possible, but choices might need to be made. So maybe, Leah, you can say just something more about the how you went about the selection. Was it exactly like this, and what other did you consider in the process?
Yes, I think that what hit us in a way that we started to notice that the problems that we witnessed 7 years ago were there. Resisting. So that was the main reason we picked this topic for the thematic analysis. But of course, you can't really plan these kind of analysis beforehand, because you don't know what is going to happen and what you can see in the reports. So it can be really, we must be really flexible in a way that we must see what is there in the reports that needs more analysis.
Yeah, Anthony.
I have a question for Leah, and it always slightly puzzles me where countries have a sort of, as it were, a binary line between higher education institutions. So they distinguish them between academic and professional institutions, and I don't have a problem with that personally. I slightly mourn the fact that we don't have that in the UK. But it seems odd that you, in a sense, from what you were almost saying, is that the requirements that you place for research and development on a professional university don't seem to be distinguishable from those of an academic university. And I would expect research and development to be of a very different nature in a professional university to in an academic university. And I wonder if that was part of the discussions that you had when you were thinking about how you were going to address this issue.
Yes, this has been under discussions when we developed, for example, this new cycle of institutional accreditation, whether there is a need to have a separate standard for the professional higher education institutions like Fachhochschule or Ammattikorkeakoulu, and for the universities, because of course the nature of this research that is expected to happen is so different. But we went this way that now we have the same standard on research and development for both types of institutions, but they are very general. So basically the standard is very scarce, telling that we need them to have focus in research and development. It must be linked to their mission and goals. There must be key performance indicators, and the impact must be measured, and the support system must be there in place, and the research and development has to support teaching and learning. So basically all the professional higher education institutions agreed that this is something that applies to them as well. The indicators is the different case, of course. There are different indicators for universities and for professional higher education institutions.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks all. That was a very nice conversation. I think a lot of a lot of sharing is also happening in the chat. So if you're a participant and you haven't had a look there yet, please do. There are agencies sharing how they carry out thematic analysis, and please feel free to add your own there as well. Good. Thank you, Anthony, Sarah, Leah, for this first session. We'll move on to the second, but don't disappear. We might still come back to you with some questions in a moment. Now we move on to the kind of second topic, which is not totally detached, of course, from the thematic analysis. We've already heard about the importance of communicating the results of thematic analysis, but now kind of more generic on the communication topic. We start with Michel Vera from the Accreditation Organization of the Netherlands and Flanders, NVAO, whose topic is Back to Basics, the advisory report. So Michel, the floor is yours.
Good morning to you all. The sharing of the screen is okay like this?
It is perfect.
That's
Perfect.
okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for NVAO to present our rather modest contribution to today's webinar and what's new at our office. My name is Michel Vera and I have been a policy advisor for NVAO ever since we started in 2004. NVAO likes to take you through the ins and outs of what I call a no-nonsense project, Back to Basics, the advisory report, with, I hope, maximal effect to the benefits of our stakeholders and hopefully also of other quality assurance agencies like yours. At the heart of any review is a report. For peers, it is the focus and the outcome of any review process. At least that's Peter Finley's point of view and also mine. This quote is taken from the ECAREP report published in 2014. ECAREP was an ENQA project, the full name of the project being Transparency of European Higher Education Through Public Quality Assurance Reports. Quite a mouthful, I admit. I will come back to the findings and conclusions of this project at a later stage. But first, just a quick in-between. You might be wondering what this friendly looking one-peaked creature is looking in the top right corner of the slide. And if I tell you, you will not believe me. And yet this is true. At an earlier stage, I was preparing a PowerPoint presentation for presenting our project to my NVAO colleagues. And I was looking on the internet for pictures, drawings of a seed, a young plant coming to bloom. And then these creatures appeared instead, and I immediately fell for them. And yes, they are viruses, but in pre-COVID times. Unbelievable. Mind you, I definitely do not believe in coincidence or prophecies, but here they are. Now back to our topic. Keeping Peter's statement in mind, we have good reasons to pay proper attention to the production of advisory reports. And for the past almost 20 years, NVAO has written a multitude of reports. The agency continually improved both the methodology and the documented tool itself. And you have probably been doing the same. Even so, NVAO felt that time had come to start afresh and go back to basics. What makes a good report? What do our readers expect? What can we learn from previous experience? And what can we learn from you, our colleagues? We can easily agree on the basic characteristics of an attractive report, but how do we translate those in a report on quality assurance? What makes a successful report? And how to ensure that we produce a report that appeals to our readers? An NVAO project team of 4 colleagues set out to investigate and came up with 6 planning steps in 6 months. Agile and lean are trendy words in project management, I understand. I prefer to call it no nonsense. We wanted to keep things simple and get quick results. The timeline was limited to 6 months, and we also limited the scope. We only considered reports for initial accreditation procedures in the Netherlands. As I said before, the team, we had 4 staff members, and we also consulted an advisory committee with representatives of the management and 1 colleague, also a policy advisor. Now let me quickly take you through the 6 steps of this project. And please note the 6 viruses, the 6 steps. The first step was to examine standards, criteria, and recommendations as formulated in various binding documents. Of course, there is the ESG, and in my world, quality assurance begins and ends with the ESG. We also studied Dutch law of higher education, the NVAO frameworks, the ENQA review reports of NVAO, by now 3 in total, and ECA's additional comments. Finally, we made good use of the outcomes of the ECA project I mentioned before. Next, we analyzed 6 advisory reports of 3 agencies with comparable procedures covering both institutional and program assessments. Also, these reports needed to be in English, and the choice fell on QAA, AAQ, and FINEC. For each report, the team answered 3 questions. Any positive findings? What do we think is okay, but not that special? And what was there anything negative, what we would certainly not copy in our reports? The next step, 3, presents the preliminary outcomes. So steps 1 and 2 resulted in preliminary outcomes regarding the structure, contents, form, language, publication, and the writer. These preliminary outcomes we discussed with the advisory committee. The next step 4, we looked for good practice in our own reports, the NVAO reports, and basically we explored a possible match between the preliminary outcomes on the step 3 and the NVAO reports. And in total, we considered 20 reports put forward by colleagues as being good practice. In step 5, we focused on the internal stakeholders, our NVAO colleagues. External stakeholders across QA agencies are more or less the same, and their needs were researched in the ECA project. So we focused on NVAO specific needs and feedback. And this brings us to the finale of the project, the outcomes. The project resulted in 5 major recommendations. The first one was to increase readership by producing 2 types of reports, a full and a summary report. That is also a recommendation we've seen in the ECA report, and we very much liked it. 2, adopt a user-friendly writing style for maximal accessibility, and especially the recommendation try and avoid the so typical quality assurance terminology. 3, invest in the training of both staff members and secretaries, also external secretaries, addressing both content and style of the reports. 4th recommendation, design a format suitable for various types of assessment procedures for maximal clarity. And the 5th, ensure an efficient implementing process for maximal commitment and impact. The outcomes of this project are not that revolutionary. A report is still a report, but a new approach has been met with enthusiasm all the same. More than ever, NVAO focuses on readership, accessibility, clarity, training, and commitment. It sounds familiar enough, and with the right methodology and tools, we managed to better meet stakeholders' demands. One lesson learned from this project is that we can benefit from a critical approach to our own work. At one stage, it might be too much routine and no longer fit for purpose. Take this challenge and go back to basics. What are we doing and why are we doing it the way we do it? It sounds simple enough. And also efficient project management is key for success. As I said before, a no-nonsense approach. A second lesson concerns stakeholders. As we know, the involvement of stakeholders is crucial to any change in methodology and processes. At the same time, we took the bold decision of not directly involving our external stakeholders, giving the excellent research done by the ENQA project team. So yes, dare to make use of what colleagues have been doing before you. At NVAO, we felt confident enough to do just that, and sure enough, mid-2020, NVAO improved its report writing methodology, and the first result proved encouraging. 1 year later, evaluation results show that stakeholders are indeed pleased with a different approach. And so are we. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was very interesting. And I'm very happy to hear that the EQUAREP project outcomes have actually found their way to a concrete use or source of inspiration at an agency. So in just a moment, I will post a link to that report in the chat. So if others are interested, you can also have easy access to that. I very much like your point too there in the takeaways, a user-friendly writing style. I think in the academia, perhaps in general, but with whoever hangs around universities like all of us, there might be this kind of old cultural feeling that if it's complicated, it's good, or if it's not complicated, it can't be really very serious. So I think that's a good lesson for me to remember, and I'd like to highlight that you can say important things in a readable and understandable manner as well. And the purpose is not that the message is lost, but looks very professional and complicated. So that's a good point. And also similarly, less is more. I think there is also that kind of tendency often to say, we'll put everything in. And we talk a lot about transparency, and sometimes transparency, I feel, is understood as we put everything there. How can you be more transparent than that? But then it will become much more difficult for people to see the wood of the trees because there are just so many trees. So I think those are good lessons that I'd pick up from that. There is a question there which I could pick up now, although we have the actual discussion only after the next presentation. Could you give me some more detail on how much detail was included in the summary reports? I don't know, do you have 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages? What kind of key elements are in the summary?
We have 2 reports, and the summary report is limited to 6 pages. That's it, 6 pages. And we also introduced that an extra step in the procedure, and that's for initial accreditation, that a colleague will read the report before it's actually finalized. And we are really strict that it should be 6 pages.
Good. Thanks for that. And we'll have more time for questions and comments after the next presentation. I take note there is one also in the Q&A, and I will pick up on that. So keep your ideas coming and contribute also with your own experiences. And I would like to invite the final speakers, let's say the fourth brief presentation, Ola O'Loughlin from the QQI and Marie O'Neill from CCT College in Dublin, who give joint presentation on how the social media might be able to enhance transparency of external QA outcomes. So please, colleagues, the floor is yours. Thank you. Now we see the slides perfectly.
Thanks, Maria, and thanks, Michelle. That was very interesting. So I just want to remind you that this is not just a presentation from QQI in Ireland. It's co-presented by the Head of Enhancement at CCT College Dublin, Maria O'Neill. Okay, so I'm just going to start this with a question. Why would a quality agency use social media to communicate external quality assurance? I've included a quote there from an ENQA workshop in 2010 saying QA must be as much about communication as action. I interpret that to mean the message as important as the message itself. Nature of social platforms, Twitter and LinkedIn, for example, ensures your QA message is both received and potentially shared by followers. This is an efficient and effective way of disseminating information quickly and reaching not just your assumed target audiences, also those stakeholders that they deem relevant. These press development peer-learning networks as all posts potential dialogues. Your followers not only read the message but can comment and share further. A single post potentially reaches many different types of stakeholders. This can be from industry, academia, other QA agencies, and of course, learners. It demonstrates that using social media increases the accessibility of the message you are making. A colleague in higher education recently commented that the use of social media has been a great leveler. It has created a fair and even playing field. Communications and information is targeted to and accessible by a diverse range of providers. This can be public and private, higher education and further education, large and small organizations. All are addressed equally, and this helps create a QA community. Social media supports and disseminates good practice. QQI has used social media to highlight our activities and events to do with academic integrity, blended learning, learner engagement, the sharing of case studies, promoting annual quality reports, and so on. Not only can we easily share this information and these events, we can also trace where these messages went, who received them, who reacted to them. Social media has built a bridge between quality assurance and its stakeholders. Encouraging this form of communication means that we increase transparency and trust. Social media has allowed us to highlight and flag our institutional review processes, for example. This is from the very first step of assembling our team of external reviewers, their training, the planning of the review itself, and its very important resulting report. Interested parties can follow each step of this process through social media along the way. So how do you communicate EQA through social media? I just saying the first thing to consider is making social media a part of your monitoring and review processes. So creating social media procedures. This can be something as simple as preparing tweets ahead of your events reviews, obtaining permission from interested stakeholders to share or to tag them in your posts. We'd also encourage you to liaise with your communication section in your organization. The team that I'm in, which is Tertiary Education Monitoring and Review Unit, we're lucky that we have a communication section in QQI that we can approach quite easily. They've been very important in helping us maintain consistency in our messages and a unity in our voice. It's also very useful to have this additional support in your organization. We would also encourage people to invest in social media and plain English training for your staff. This has been invaluable when it comes to Twitter. It's so different to ordinary writing or academic writing in particular. I mean, you're limited to 280 characters, for example. In this way, that social media is very handy in far as you are forced to clear because of these limits. Before trying to use tools that are there. So, for example, you can link to the official reports and documents that are available online. You can tag institutions. You can tag stakeholders that have given you permission to do so. You could also use the hashtag function. This is, for example, our review process of higher education is called KINCHA. By using hashtag KINCHA, we have a means there to search all of our posts to do with KINCHA, but also we can group them together and analyze how they've been digested. Now, I've included 3 tweets there. I'm not going to open up now just because of time, but I think they're a good demonstration of how we take processes like our quality dialogue meetings or the publication of a review report. It kind of humanizes that message and, you know, gives a clear picture of how these things happen. If anybody wants me to share these slides later, by the way, I can do that too. I'm just going to pass to my colleague Marie O'Neill from CCT College Dublin, and she's going to close out the presentation.
Thank you, Wallace, and thank you everybody for the fascinating presentations today. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Head of Enhancement at CCT College. I've worked in higher education for 30 years in universities and institutes of technology, some of which are universities now. And I have recently migrated into an academic enhancement role. CCT College is a private higher education college offering programs in business and ICT up to level 9 of the National Framework for Qualifications. Apologies, I'm going to keep my camera off just while I do this presentation. I can pop it on at the end just so that the network is stable. But from a provider perspective, I'd just like to talk about a couple of benefits to the social media policy. So it basically keeps you up to date with trends, and it also encourages peer dialogue. To give you an example, QQI ran a series on blended learning, and we are now officially blended learning providers. And it was invaluable, the webinars that were circulated, you know, blended learning guidelines, policy documents. They also have Academic Integrity Week. A whole range of resources are circulated. And they also publish case studies. So there's been a series of case studies, for example, on student partnership and the QA sort of aspects to that. And I just get a sense with the social media activity that I'm plugged into the latest developments. You get a sense of innovation, currency, but most importantly, you really get a sense of the communities of practice around blended learning, around student partnership. And I have actually reached out to various, you know, academics or QA professionals to collaborate on projects or to get additional information. You also get a sense of, with QQI, the international community of practice and the European community of practice. I notice, for example, they will share, you know, events that ENQA are running, and that was really appealing to me to just sort of have a sense of the international and European landscape. To give you an example, after Academic Integrity Week recently, I contacted an international expert in academic integrity based at the University of Calgary, just purely based on seeing some social media interaction between QQI and her. And also she spoke at one of their webinars, and she's now going to be at an event that I'm organising along with the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Ireland. And I think that's the richness of their social media policy. It makes very visible standards, the community of practice, people who are willing to share knowledge as well. So you're constantly enhancing, and I work in academic enhancement, so that's really good. I saw a post, they often share things that are very useful, for example, resources for students, and I saw something about Europass, which sort of evidences the sort of quality and transparency and mobility of qualifications. And I didn't know too much about this, and I reached out to a head of careers in one of the universities in Ireland, and they were teaching classes to students about this. And we began a dialogue, and we now teach classes to students at CCT about Europass. So it really is impacting practice on the ground. In terms of, I get a sense on the next one here, a sense of the stakeholders with whom QQI engages. I instantly noticed, and perhaps I didn't have a sense of that from the outside, of just the huge range of bodies that QA agencies liaise with. So I immediately noticed in their social media posts that they were liaising with the National Student Engagement Programme, the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning, the Higher Education Authority. And I really got a sense of this sort of very rich, dynamic dialogue between these agencies in the Irish higher education ecosystem. And that, as a provider, is very interesting to see. Again, I would get new insights about developments, innovations, resources, publications. And that is very, very evident. I think maybe to people who are not directly involved in QA, there could be perception, you know, that QA bodies are somehow that little bit removed. And certainly when you see QQI social media policy, I just realized the connectivity between QA agencies and such a huge range of bodies that I perhaps was not as aware of. But one of the most important things, and the next point I'd like to make is basically about recognizing areas of expertise and of a human face, a very visible human face to QA. I suddenly became aware of roles that I didn't even know existed. So for example, I realized, you know, there's quality assurance managers, they're involved in the reviews and they disseminate, you know, key findings about reviews. But I noticed this role called Stakeholder Engagement. There's a Stakeholder Engagement manager, and she would share a lot of posts about student partnership. And she would attend a lot of events, you know, about student partnership, student success. And so I followed her because I realized she was always sort of disseminating the key findings. And it's very interesting, the points that you've made about themes today, because that is something that I felt came through very strongly in the social media policy. And it made me, as a person who works in enhancement, feel that I need to keep abreast of themes. And those themes come through in the social media policy, like student partnership, student success, evidence-based practice, and so forth. So you get, again, a very human face, and I could actually sort of say who does what role in QQI, something that I might not have been able to do, you know, as easily. And QA is an element of my role, but I'm not the institutional liaison with QQI. So it definitely made QQI a much more sort of transparent and understandable organization for somebody like me. And finally, in light of QQI's regulatory role, its mission, its purpose, its vision, I really got a sense of standards, you know, of that regulatory muscle, if you like, because they would circulate RPL guidelines, blended learning guidelines. They recently published something on interpreting the core QA guidelines, and I'm involved in a national committee that is involved in a knowledge sharing exercise about QA, and I happened to share this publication on the day that it was published. The project manager of this QA sort of knowledge sharing exercise, she saw it on my page, and she was like, "This is fantastic. This is exactly what we need for this particular project." And so I guess what I really like about the social media policy is a sense of the sort of timeliness. How quickly things sort of are disseminated. You've got a sense that you don't have to go rummaging around for it, though I have to say the QQI website is excellent and it's really well organized, but things just sort of land as you need them, which is wonderful. And just to conclude,
Very, yes, please do indeed.
The branding, the branding is also extremely strong, and it's really well done, and you just get a sense of professionalism and quality. And I think the visibility of the social media policy was particularly important during the COVID-19 crisis. So it's just been sort of a game changer for me, definitely in terms of my role. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Marie and Orla, for the presentation and insight in the social media world, and a lot of good practice there. I think it's, you know, we're probably all on the different social media channels, but I think this kind of systematic and professional use of social media is perhaps something that is not always straight there, and also the training. I have, first of all, a question, whether you have all a kind of guidelines. I mean, is there kind of a template, you know, when you do a tweet, you should link this, link that, or is it still a little bit as it comes? Should there be a picture? How do you make sure that they kind of have a consistency and are kind of part of the institutional communication strategy?
But I think for us anyway, like preparation is important, and also being aware of the limits of a tweet. we would work very closely with our people in communications, so they're there to advise. So, for example, for certain processes that we're highlighting, the tweets will be very similar for consistency. So it might be just a matter of swapping information in and out. But communications, excuse me, our communications people would have oversight then, so they might suggest adding, you know, photographs here, or you know, tagging such and such. So yeah, we do have templates. They're quite simple, and because it's such a small, it's such like 280 characters, it's such a small amount of text that you are producing, it's quite easy to move things around. But yeah, the key thing is stay focused, less is more.
Yeah, exactly. We've heard that before today as well. But basically, I mean, the idea is that every process or every report is tweeted. So it's not really just up to the who is coordinating the process or who is the contact person, but that there is like a systemic approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These things would be lined up before the event even happens.
Yeah. Very good. I have a question on training, and there is both a question to Michelle about the training, what kind of training there was or is for staff and the secretaries to improve the reports, maybe what kind of content, how is it done, and then after that also to QQI a question on what is this training on social media that you have for your staff, if you can just say a few words. So Michelle, if you're there.
I am there, but I can't start the video because the host has stopped it. Somehow, but that's okay. I can talk.
Okay, let me see if I can do something about that.
Well, I've shown you the 5 main recommendations, but that doesn't mean that's the end of our work. That was the project. So other colleagues undertook the follow-up activities, and team members of the original project were also involved in that. And one of the recommendation was, of course, the training. And we have a team of staff members being responsible for the training. And the outcomes of the project are now part of that training. For example, it's also in the slide, we emphasize that secretaries should try to write, to use words, sentences that anybody can understand, and not just quality assurance people. And that is the main challenge, actually, for writing an accessible report. And we actually asked the professional in text writing to join us for the training. That agency was already involved in the training, but he has been asked now to specifically focus on that particular aspect. We also included, for example, separate chapters now for recommendations and commendations in bullet points. And that also asks an extra effort, because we also want these recommendations to be phrased in a way that it's easily understandable. And they should be limited to 2 or 3 sentences, not the full text. The full text will come in the full report. Also important for the training is that chapters 3, 4, and 5 in the full report is copy-paste in the summary report. Because an important issue is that we don't want secretaries to have extra work, because extra work means extra money, and who is paying for that? The university. So that was something we didn't want. So we had to, what Maria was also already saying, also less is more. We had to restrict the number of pages, and also go back to basics in the sense of what do we really need as information in the reports. So we decided that, okay, if chapters 3, the conclusion, 4, the commendations and 5, the recommendations, are copy-paste, then that saves time. The only difference between the two reports is actually the summary in a different language. If we write a report in English, page 5 of the summary report will be in Dutch. The other way around, if the report is in Dutch, then the summary will be in English, page 5. It's a bit confusing, summary, because it's called summary report, but in Dutch, it's more, if I translate it, then you would say a concise report. Mm-hmm. It's a limited report. Yeah. Because the chapter 6 in the summary report is also called summary. So that's confusing when translating it to English. Okay. So this is what we focus on in the training. Okay. There are lots of other things, but that would, maybe I can, we have a coordinator also at the office for the training of the secretaries, and that might be helpful. If you have any more specific questions, I'll put it in the chat. Okay.
Thanks so much. That's very helpful. So those who really want to train their report writers could get some good practice from there. Good. And Ola, how do you do this training on the social media? Of course, I mean, there might be a generations gap there. I mean,
no,
it takes me half an hour to do a tweet, and so how do you do that, and who is involved? Is it for everybody? Is it for some people, etc.?
Okay, so in QQI, we brought in a social media expert to initially instruct all staff on the basics of social media. So this covers simple things, or seemingly simple things, like setting up a Twitter account, how to ensure engagement with posts by using pictures or linking off to different things, and the use of simple language, very important. And not only instruction on how to tweet, but how to retweet effectively, how to attach your message to another message, and how to recognize appropriate content and language, and not to tweet, don't tweet the wrong things. This expert was involved in social media training for the public sector. So that's a very different, I think, type of social media than perhaps a commercial enterprise. On top of this, staff members would receive a certain amount of training on the use of plain English. So that's something, there's lots of documents out there on plain English available online, but very important, I think, when you're trying to, produce focused short posts on Twitter.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's kind of also the awareness of what it means, because I think for a public organization particularly, you retweet something and it could be read as if our organization supports, agrees, etc. So it's very quick to retweet and very slow to kind of repair the damage, if any, afterwards. So I think that's a very important point. I'm asking the audience if there are any other questions or experiences to share, and also welcome Leah, Anthony, Sarah to comment or ask questions to their colleague on this topic of communication. Have you shared similar good practices, or do you have any observations on those? Sarah, did you want to say something? Your mic is still off, but yes, there you are.
I think that, the very positive aspect of the two presentations is the training aspect, because when you change policy or you develop new ways of doing things, you have to bring everyone along with you. And so I think that in a similar way, EQ Arts places training, more of our experts, but also the board members as a very important aspect of what we do. So I very much enjoyed both the presentations and took that away, really. And also I think I'm really commenting rather than asking questions. I think the question of the summary report is an interesting one as well, that I think I would like to take back to our board to discuss. But yeah, very, very, very instructive presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, for your comment. And it also made me think how important it is that everybody is involved to a smaller, a larger extent, not everybody has to be a communications expert or have to be excellent report writers, but to understand why things are done as they are. And so that the report is one of the biggest tools of communication of the agency's work in a way. And then all the rest comes in as well. And people need to understand and be part of that, so that there isn't this 2 odd people in the office somewhere doing communication, but that the whole agency's existence is about communicating what it does. And
yes, we have a small office staff and a more active board. So then that's how we talk about communication. One thing I wanted to say though is I'm still processing the opportunities for using social media. It's sort of, I think for me it's quite an innovative approach. So I would like to take that away and think about the social media aspect. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else who wanted to? Leah, did you want to say something on this topic to the colleagues?
Maybe very interesting indeed. But in our case, we started to do several years ago already the summaries of the council's decisions to be readable for a wider public. So it's nicely designed and it's linked to our database of study programs. So if the students are looking for their study program where to continue their studies, they get the study programs that are linked to our council's decisions that are. We try our best as well to use the normal language, but of course we haven't put that extra effort on that, but it was very, very interesting indeed. Thank you.
If you have any suggestion to make it more user-friendly, intended learning outcomes, that's a hard one. We're still, thinking about that, how we can, there are plenty of quality assurance words that we struggle with, but in the end, we get there. Yes.
Good. Thanks for that sharing. I think it's very important, and it's very nice to see that although the other participants aren't able to voice with the orally their contentment or the ideas or what they can pick up from this session, I think there have been very many interesting points to take home for everybody. So I would like to very warmly thank all of you for your presentations. And, we've had over 60 people attend today, which is quite a large number of people. So I'm very happy that you've joined us and that all the participants have joined us as well. And I hope I do speak for all of you, Ola, Michelle, Sarah, Anthony, Leah, Marie as well, that if anybody wants to get in contact with you and ask you for something more, or you can either answer them directly or direct them to a colleague, like Michelle already put the contact of Henry Pons into the chat, so that you can get some more details on the specific elements you might be particularly interested in. And of course, you're always welcome to write to ENQA. Go and have a look at the ENQA rep results as well. It's quite an old project by now, but I think it's not yet old-fashioned, I would say.
It is, so. But it took some time, to find a way to make it part of a project, because simply ENQA rep, not all that many colleagues are familiar with the project, and that was a nice way of introducing it because it was helpful, very helpful.
Good. So there you are. Go to the links. The presentations will be available on the website. They actually are already there. The recording will be there as soon as it's been edited a little bit from the oddities in the beginning and the end. So you can also send the link to colleagues who might be interested in listening to that at a later stage. So warm thanks to everybody. It's Friday. For some of us, it's afternoon, Leah. So, you're on the good side of the Friday now. And for the rest of you, have a very nice day and have a very good weekend. And thanks again. See you next time.